Okay. Rip internet, forever in our hearts. And now back. Oh dear. Well, there's going to be two stream videos. I need to change internet service providers because IINet can suck my... Never mind. We were talking about green stuff before I lost connection, and I forget what I said, but it was something along the lines of don't buy army painted green stuff because it cures because it's two pieces that are connected to each other. All right. Well, we will hang about for maybe half an hour longer. My assumption is that since we have lost connection, everyone will have wandered off, and that is perfectly reasonable. However, on the off chance that anyone sticks around and wants to come and have a chat, then they're very welcome to do so for about half an hour more, by which time I think I will be basically done. All we've got to get left to get done with these lads, they've got almost all of their weapons on them. So we will be adding a curated and artisanal selection of inbred looking heads, and then call that a night because the green stuff will have to cure. Ninetail says, just let me know that you were live. I was live an hour and a half ago, and then the internet cut out. I like doing these, they seem to be fun. I'm going to try and do some on a Sunday morning, my time, but I will usually, or probably almost always, schedule these so that you'll know that they're coming. However, in this case, hello, Ninetails, welcome to the chat. I'm glad that you could make it. Everyone else is gone because the internet died, but these are the nature of things. Okay. We have a couple more arms and a bunch of heads to add on. What have I got that I can use as a way of holding a lantern? The children yearn for lanterns. That looks good. That is life. Yeah, well. If I did this for a living, I would be deeply frustrated by internet connections, but I very fortunately, well perhaps very fortunately, don't do this for a living. It would be certainly very interesting, but the nature of hobby content and wargames like Infinity and Conquest is that you will not have an audience of the size needed, and that's totally okay. All right, what am I working on? So I am working on, these are 100 Kingdoms for Conquest, and they are militia, but I am converting them into still militia, honestly, but with a particular desire to have them have Warhammer Fantasy Empire Free Company kind of vibes. And I will use them as militia. They will be questionably tournament legal, but I don't think anyone will give me any grief. And hey Rob, did you know that you should buy separate tubed green stuff? Thank you, Professional Goblin. Yes, I did know. But yeah, I wanted to have a kind of free company vibe, and I love me Warhammer Fantasy. Don't hugely love me Old World because I can't play a game anymore that has Games Workshop classic turn structure, unfortunately. But what I can do is play Conquest, which is a very, very good game, and I can make my miniatures look as Reichlandy as possible. Although I think technically this would be a Talabheim color scheme. If I was, yeah, red and white. That's Talabheim, right? I can't remember what color Reichland is. If I went and looked, I'm sure I would find out. But yes, shameful display. Cannot remember exactly. Right, there we go. The obligatory single militiaman holding a lantern. Got to be one. It's either a lantern or a torch, and I don't want to do the OSL from a torch. A lantern is just a little easier. It's a bastard. Count how many times the streamer gets super glue on his hand. Count how many times the streamer super glues a piece to himself. But I think we're okay here. All right. Yep. So we'll crack on for probably about another half an hour, kind of tops. By which point I will have gotten done, I think, everything that I was looking to get done. And mostly what we need to do now is get heads on these lads. And then maybe a couple of random accoutrements, etc. Now, there's one head that we might use as a reasonable floppy hat, but let's leave that for last. Alright, let's find some lads with feathers and other bits and pieces. Yes, the gentleman with the feathered hat. Zephyr notes that they are in the process of coming to terms with the fact that Pathfinder has semi-balanced full casters. I'm playing a Pathfinder campaign at the moment, actually, and it's interesting. I have critiques of it as a system, but they are more just of the way that Dungeons and Dragons-esque games work generally. And I think it's not really. Nuka says that they're basing and painting some Jade Cutthroats for a one-day Infinity tournament. Good luck. sincerely good luck. Jade Cutthroats are a unit that I have never personally been able to use, but that is obviously a personal and moral failing, and no reflection on the unit itself. So yeah, Pathfinder. My critique of Pathfinder is really just a critique of Dungeons and Dragons, which is that Pathfinder is much better at this than Dungeons and Dragons, which is that Dungeons and Dragons does this thing where it says, all right, you're role-playing. That's great, that's fantastic. You're going to tell cool stories. You're going to hang out with your friends and have these fantastic tales. Now, we're going to give you rules for how to roleplay. Here are the rules for how to roleplay. There are some skill checks, and also here are two pages of your character sheet, or like 90% of the available real estate is going to be devoted to how to hit people with a sword or equivalent, and we are going to give you that in explicit detail such that you are bounded by that. And that's a huge problem that Dungeons and Dragons has, where it goes, hey, we're going to present you with a bunch of options, but not really. We're going to tell you, here is how you interact. See these numbers? You have +8 to hit, you do 1d4 + 8 damage if you hit, with a critical threat range of 19 to 20 times 2, because I'm a D&D 3.5 child, and you will never convince me otherwise. And the problem with that as a system, and Pathfinder does the same thing, but only to an extent. I do have some credit to give Pathfinder in that respect. The problem with that as a system is that it constrains it, particularly newer players, but even older players. It constrains what you can do, because you are inevitably going to try and do the thing that the rules tell you can do. You're like, you look to your character sheet, right? You consult with the rules for your character to tell you what your character can do, and the rules for your character tell you that you can roll a +8 to hit and deal 1d8 + 4 damage. And so you do that, and you can try and narrate it, and you can dress it up, but Dungeons and Dragons is very bad at letting you do anything other than roll +8 to hit and deal 1d8 + 4 damage. Now, Pathfinder tries to split the difference here, because Pathfinder, particularly 2nd edition Pathfinder, which is what we're talking about, 2nd edition Pathfinder really, really wants to be Dungeons and Dragons, but it is cognizant of that problem, and it solves it in a way that other games don't. So games like, hey, it's time for Rob to mention Blades in the Dark again. That's a shot. Games like Blades in the Dark have just completely non-standard, they have non-Dungeons and Dragons combat mechanics. I love Blades in the Dark, it's fantastic. One of the reasons why it's fantastic is that it doesn't constrain you quite as much as the way Dungeons and Dragons does. Anyone who has played Blades in the Dark with a character who has reached 4 pips in shoot or 4 pips in stab a person with knife will be familiar with the same problem emerging in that context, but it at least wraps it up in a you have to narrate a little bit kind of way. Pathfinder does it by saying, okay, you can roll +8 to hit and deal 1d8 + 4 damage, but the second time you do that in a turn, it's not going to be as good as the first time. And the third time you do it in a turn, it's going to really not be as good as the first time. So maybe you should think of something else to do, because you just have sheer mechanical diminishing returns. So think of something, mate. Think of something that is not roll 1d8 plus 8 to hit, 1d8 plus 4 damage. And if you'd like to think of something, here are all of these possible actions that you might take. Now, the advantage of that is that it, particularly if you are just playing the game, you have a strong mechanical incentive to figure something out that's not swing with sword. Because swinging with sword the third time has attracted a -10 to hit, and you ain't going to do jack. So I try and intimidate them. Try and do something interesting. Hey, what's this trip attack? What's this? What are these different options? And so what Pathfinder gets you to do is it gets you to engage mechanically with the system, with all of the other things that the system offers. The critique I have of Pathfinder is that the cost that it bears of doing that is, oh god, there are so many rules in Pathfinder for random useless crap that you do as your third action. And like, okay, Rob, but you were just complaining. I was just complaining about that. But like, I remember the first time we sat down to play Pathfinder, and we were sitting there trying to figure out the difference between like staggered, stunned, slowed, confuzzled, like mildly inconvenienced, frightened, and like I swear, Pathfinder. If you told me that Pathfinder separately tracked the frightened and scared statuses, I would believe you, because it has to, because it wants to provide all of these different options for the players to pursue, etc., etc., etc. So like pros and cons, pros and cons. But I have time for Pathfinder. But Pathfinder is a game that is, if you want combat crunch, you have to want combat crunch. But if you want combat crunch, it probably does it a little bit better than Dungeons and Dragons. The action economy as a mechanical concept is really cool, and I particularly like how it works with animal companions and summons and stuff, because it is like I'm playing actually. So in our campaign, I am basically playing a demigryph knight. Like, what if Regil Derenge from Pathfinder, Wrath of the Righteous, was a human retiree and also a demigryph knight would be my character, and I have once again somehow become the moral center of the party, as always seems to happen. Uh, and the the way that it handles, the way that Pathfinder handles mounts is that, hey, that third thing that I can do. You all are playing some really mainstream RPGs. Yes, yes, we're basic. It's the nature of the beast. That's why Dungeons and Dragons is such a big deal, because it is mainstream. Like, you cannot get around that. You can't get away from it. It's fantastic to sit down with all of your mates and play the game that is specifically designed to be a simulacrum of the specific campaign that you want to run. That is a fantastic experience. But everyone's got to learn that RPG. Everyone's got to take that time, and it's not always possible. I actually really want to run at some point. I want to run a Dresden Files RPG. It uses the Fate system, which is eminently serviceable. The problem with running a Dresden Files RPG is that I live in Australia, and the way that the Dresden Files RPG encourages you to do a session 0 is to actually just figure out what all of the Dresden Files magical stuff that's what the Dresden Files is about, right? It's about the masquerade, for lack of a better term, is happening in your city. And I live in Australia, and the idea of like magical Canberra is possibly the dumbest thing that I have ever heard. I can't in good conscience run a Dresden Files game set in my town without either being incredibly dumb, or possibly co-opting indigenous, like native peoples' uh, mythology, which I am just not comfortable doing. Like, just not remotely comfortable. There are some really interesting things in terms of Indigenous Australian First Nations mythology. It's super cool. Some of the most interesting stuff that I've learned in like even just the last year has been about the frankly brutalized by white occupation culture of the indigenous peoples, but I am just not comfortable trying to turn that into um, Like, if you put a gun to my head and said, run a Dresden Files campaign, I would probably spend some time. What are the names of the? Um, there are two different indigenous peoples that consider like different parts of the Australian Capital Territory to be their sort of like their lands, and I cannot offhand remember them, but I could if I went and looked for it. Go and have a look at some of their mythology, etc. The problem with that, of course, is that a significant portion of their mythology has been erased by some of the absolutely cooked shit that they have been subjected to over history. Um, and I could talk about that for a lengthy amount of time, but it would not make for a super enjoyable and interesting stream. Well, it might be interesting, but I don't have the emotional wherewithal to actually go into that at any great length. Suffice to say, I can't run a Dresden Files campaign. I am not physically capable, but it would be something that would be neat. Man, these are incredibly crusty looking faces. I'm so happy with this. I wonder if this will show up on screen. Um, Look at that. Look at that smiling, wrinkly lad. Perfect. This is what I wanted. Anyway, it's Ngunnawal. So yeah, Chris notes it's a Ngunnawal and another one. But no, they've got names. I can't do it justice, and so I'm not going to talk about it at any great length. But anyway, but yeah, a lot better. Pathfinder Second Edition is a lot better at being Dungeons and Dragons than Dungeons and Dragons is. But again, the big advantage of Dungeons and Dragons is that it is mainstream. You can reliably sit down with your mates, and everyone knows how to play it. And because everyone knows how to play it, you can play it. But yeah, the three action economy is super cool. So yeah, I am playing. I'm a fighter. I would play spellcasters because wizards are powerful and have options. However, this time around, I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to try a fighter. Let's see what we can do. I'm told that this is a bit more balanced in Pathfinder. You'll be able to do cool stuff, and that's actually been true to a greater or lesser extent. I took some feat that also I didn't want to have to learn the rules that much. I learned some feat that let me have an entire ass animal companion at level 3 or something, and now I have a wonderful demigryph that I'm just using the stats for a terror bird for, and it is a wonderful derpy big bird that I ride into battle. And the action economy is I have to spend one of my 3 actions every turn for my big burb to do anything. And so even though I get some action economy because the bird gets to take 2 actions each time when I command it to do a thing every turn, it imposes some limits. Its actions are not necessarily higher quality than mine. Like it's very whoever at Pathfinder at Paizo came up with how that worked, very good work in terms specifically of making a D&D game that is a little bit better at being D&D than D&D is. But you've still got to be in for you've got to be in for hitting people with swords because that is your primary means of interacting with the game world. But it is better. It's definitely better than D&D is at that. But again, D&D is a lingua franca. That's its advantage, and those are super valuable. Okay. We have glue on our fingers, and holding green stuff is therefore difficult. I think we're going to have just about enough heads, which is nice. I may have to do up some more green stuff. Yeah, I will have to do up some more green stuff. But that's okay. Yeah, these guys are looking like crusty militia. I'm very pleased about this. Zephyr says that they're playing a cleric because you only have marshals and half-casters. I kind of want to play a summoner, because ever since I saw the summoner in Pathfinder 1st Edition, the idea of the whole, like, the Eidolon and how it's sort of like, the way they do it is, hey, get wild, come up with something super cool. That's super neat, like, conceptually. and they had all of the different like options that you could customize an Eidolon back in first edition Pathfinder to like look and be and have different feats and effects. I have no idea how powerful it was, how like useful it was to a party in first edition Pathfinder, but the concept always kind of appealed. Never quite got around to playing one because we mostly during the lockdown years, which is when I finally stopped being a forever DM, we mostly played Dungeons and Dragons. Um, if you have too many heads, well, some of the guys get two. I will not have too many heads. I have 4 left, and 4. Actually, we're gonna be perfect. I might even need to get a mate to print me out some more of these because I don't like the generic militia heads particularly much at all, and we've done 12 of these, and I need 16 for the list for the event tomorrow. Tomorrow, Saturday. But that's fine. However, some of them I'm going to imagine have an ear growing out of the back of their scalp. As an Australian, I would consider that making them honorary Tasmanians. Oh wow, yeah, these are wonderfully. What is this guy? This guy looks like so it's not going to show up on camera. I will try and this lad. It's not quite showing up in the light there because I can only stream in 780 720p. But he looks like the the skinny pirate. The it's the Silmarillion, and you get points for trying pirate from Pirates of the Caribbean. Like obvious homage. Same facial structure, but he's wearing a skull cap. It is wonderfully derpy. I appreciate that very much. All right, we need a tiny little bit more green stuff. Tasmanian. My boss at work, who is a wonderful person. She's very competent, and to be perfectly honest, she is given a completely unfair rap by certain people who are senior to us. But she's Tasmanian, and she makes good fun of her people. She moved to Canberra when she was fairly young, I think, from memory, but she grew up in Tas. But yeah, for those who are not Australian in the room, Tasmania is a tiny island. Technically speaking, it's an Australian state. It's a tiny island off the south coast, and because it is very, very, very small and has a very limited population, you can guess the jokes that come out of and about that. All right. I am super pleased at how these have come together. They should read visually as militia. I can send them into the absolute breach and get thoroughly murdered, but they look more like a motley bunch of individuals, which is exactly what I was going for, and will make them more interesting to... Well, actually, it'll make them hugely challenging to paint because I can't production line them, but that's a rod for my own back. I'm comfortable with that. And I'll take it in exchange for the visual interest. Alrighty. What's everyone else working on? I know a lot of people are actually... So some of the European viewers who made it onto the stream before were just like, this is a work day for them. I know someone was sitting down to start some Photoshop work and has this on in the background, which is kind of like, yep, that sounds about right. That's what I use. After this, I'm going to be loading up Total Warhammer 3 and trying finally to play a Mother Ostankia, good old Mother Stank campaign. I've had the DLC for her for ages, and I had a crack with it, but her start position in... I don't know what the go was. 10 models to finish for Adepticon. That would be for Infinity? What, Professional Goblin, what faction are you playing for Adepticon? But yeah, I'm going to play some Total War after this, and I've wanted to play a Mother Ostankia campaign for a while, but her campaign mechanics, for those of you who are familiar with Total War, were she starts with like this selection of like wild things and beasts because she's a Baba Yaga XP, which is fine. But then she gets access to the full Kislev roster when she forms an alliance with the Kislevite faction, and then it just unlocks the faction for her, which is fine, except for some ungodforsaken reason, they elected to have her start position be in Nagaroth, which is like, how exactly am I supposed to form an alliance with a Kislevite faction when they are literally on the far side of the world, presumably up to their ass in Clan Mulder by the time you go and find them? I genuinely don't get the, like, maybe the creative assembly devs play campaigns over a much longer scale than I do or something. But by God, she was a faction that resisted having a good campaign experience for me for quite some time. But in the most recent update, they fixed that, which is cool. So I'm going to give her a crack. Vanilla JSA. Nice. That's cool. Lim is painting some Toha. Awesome. Micro is wondering what Infinity faction to play while doing the dishes. Well, Micro, I would suggest that it's quite difficult to play Infinity while doing the dishes, so I would finish doing the dishes. um, what else have we got? I think the idea was that you use a later part of her cauldron mechanic to teleport her to Griffinwood. Yeah, maybe, but like, yeah, I hit that issue. I don't think I ever actually like the play experience I had with her was, what the hell am I doing? What's going on? Why can't I unlock the interesting parts of the roster that I want to use? Because I quite like, well, I like ish playing Kislev. Um, and then I just tapped out and played a more interesting faction. Okie doke. Vanilla JSA. So that Vanilla JSA is an interesting faction. I've got a local that is really trying to do their best to find the edges that Vanilla JSA has over Obano and Butai, because it's real. Like, you, at first glance, you could absolutely be forgiven for assuming that, like, what and why is the point of Vanilla JSA, when we can play either of the sectorals. But there are a couple of edges that are interesting and worth exploring. I think it's probably one of the more difficult factions to genuinely optimize for, but you get access to Hatamoto and a bunch of other interesting stuff, so power to you and good luck. Lim says that they keep building Toha lists but have yet to play them. I should play some Toha. They are on my list of things to play. I've got a list actually that I want to play. I need to get around to it, but I have not done so just yet. Too many other things. Alrighty. Well, that is 12 extremely motley, Empire-esque, Free Company-esque 100 Kingdoms militia that I am very happy with. So that was good fun. Alright, everyone. That will wrap up the stream for today. We're going to aim to do these, not necessarily every week, but, thereabouts. But as noted, we're also looking to do these from time to time, maybe on Sundays. The big challenge is, as you'll notice from this Conquest Assembly, I've got a bunch of events coming up for Conquest. Those events are occupying quite a lot of space on weekends, and so trying to find streaming time might be a bit of a challenge. But I enjoy this. It's a good way to get a hobby done, to have a chat, to do something, to get some content up for the channel, etc. I hope very much that you all enjoyed this. Apologies for the internet outage before. It was unavoidable. I'm probably going to try and change service providers because IINet sucks, but we'll figure that one out in due time. Anyway, we're going to wrap this up now. Thank you everyone for turning up. Have yourself a good evening or a good morning,